I'm Jan Paynter, and I would like to welcome you again to our program Politics Matters. Our guest today is Virginia Senator Edd Houck, Democrat from the 17th District of Spotsylvania County. R. Edward Houck was born in Smyth County, Virginia. He received his Bachelor's of Science degree in Education from Concord College and his Master's of Education from the University of Virginia. He began his teaching career in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, as a middle school science teacher. He has also been a guidance counselor, assistant principal, and director of student services for Fredericksburg City Public Schools. Having retired after 34 years of service as a public school educator, he is now director of corporate and community programs for Medicorps in Fredericksburg. Senator Houck was elected to the Virginia State Senate in 1983 and currently serves on the Finance, Education, Health, Transportation Rules, and General Laws and Technology Committees. He also serves as chairman of the Senate Education and Health Committee and the Senate Finance Committee's Health and Human Resources Subcommittee. Senator Houck and his wife Dana have 2 adult children and live in Spotsylvania, Virginia. Welcome, Senator Houck.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Jan.
Before we discuss your reasons for running for re-election, Senator, your legislative priorities and sponsored bills, as well as your views on some of the broader challenges and issues facing Virginia to date, tell us, if you would, since this program is about why politics matters, what brought you to politics after a long career in education, what developed your commitment to public service?
Well, it was actually my career in education that prompted me to seek elected office. My wife Dana and I, even in undergraduate school where we were married, we were very active in the political arena. But once we finished undergraduate school and moved to Spotsylvania, we decided we want to become involved in the local Democratic committee. But as an educator, it became apparent to me in the early years of my teaching career that it was really politicians who were having the direct impact on my love, my career, my chosen career, and that was teaching. And blending the interest I had in politics with seeing the impact that policymakers were having on my beloved profession, I decided to run for public office in 1983, and as it ended up, it was successful, even though I was the decided underdog in that first election.
In the month of June, state and local papers make note of the fact that Virginia lost 14,000 jobs. At the same time, Virginia ended, as you well know, its fiscal year with a modest surplus with better than anticipated agency revenue and tax savings. The progress notes that most of the monies were already allocated in the form of a rainy day fund, water quality, and transportation. What, Senator, is the Federal Action Contingency Trust?
Well, this was an announcement by Governor McDonald just recently when we ended the second fiscal year in the black. And being on the Senate Finance Committee and one of the budget conferees, I'm intricately involved with the state finances and the budget process. This proposal by the governor, of which I think is a sound idea, is to take at least a portion of this surplus that we've ended the fiscal year with and put it in a fund so that we would not allocate it, at least immediately, till we see what the impact is going to occur in Washington with federal actions, with budget balancing and all the difficulty that Congress seems to be having with dealing with the nation's finances. So this is really just a fund, a holding place, if you will, to see what effect the Washington actions will have on Virginia. Virginia is highly dependent upon the federal government for contracting, military, and etc. So if there's major reductions in the United States budget by Congress, that will have an effect on Virginia. So this fund that the governor has announced is really just a holding place until we see what those federal actions will be. Well,
you were quoted as saying you felt it was a wise decision, so I'm guessing that still obtains.
Oh yes, I think so.
What are some of your ideas for needed job creation, Senator?
Well, in Virginia, even during this difficult economic times that we've been in, going back to Governor Kane, as he was leaving office, we were dealing with tremendous budget reductions. Now under Governor McDonnell, at least we've seen a slight, and it is a slight uptick in the state revenues. The key area that we can do with jobs is through the Governor's Economic Development Fund. In these difficult budget times we've had, we've still earmarked money for the executive branch to undertake economic development, to try to entice new businesses, new jobs, new corporations, particularly clean energy and high-tech jobs to Virginia. So from our standpoint, I think it's providing economic opportunity, keeping state spending, which is definitely in line here at Virginia, and holding the line on any kind of tax increases while we get through this recession.
I noted that some of the teacher pension funds have been restored to some degree, which must be something that you're happy about.
Well, we were really faced with a Hobson's choice when we took the $600 million out of the retirement system. We had already cut the state budget some $5 billion, and we were still in a deficit situation. So rather than lay off more state employees or college faculty or even public school teachers, the difficult but I think necessary choice was to take wasn't just not pay the state's share of $600 million. And we did that for a savings to the state, but with the understanding we would have to start paying it back in because, after all, it is the retirement system for our employees, both local and state. So we're well underway of repaying what we didn't do in 2010.
Discuss, if you would, the Higher Education Opportunity Act and what it will mean for our schools in the state.
This was an initiative of Governor McDonnell's that the intent, the goal, is to create more college-educated citizens in Virginia by the year 2025. The governor asked me to sponsor the legislation, introduce the legislation. I serve on his Higher Education Advisory Council, and all this grows out of the business higher education advocacy groups that recognize that in order for the economy in Virginia to flourish and to continue to flourish, you've got to have an educated workforce. So this act really set up a mechanism and funding. I submitted a budget amendment on behalf of the governor to fund higher education more fully in Virginia. It's been cut during this recession dramatically, too much, but it happened. So this infusion of money and this whole programming is really trying to focus on math, science, the STEM areas, math, science, and engineering, and to have a higher educated workforce here in Virginia. And I was proud to sponsor the legislation. It passed, and of course the funding was desperately needed by our institutions of higher education here in Virginia, including my favorite, the University of Virginia.
What other, in that connection, what other educational initiatives are you involved in presently, and what are your ideas about educational improvements such as K through 12 and improving per pupil funding?
Right. Well, so much of it gets back to funding, and during this recession, unfortunately, for the first time in modern history, we actually cut the funding to our public education system to the tune of about $1 billion. And that was very painful for me because, again, that was my passion. That's my emphasis for being in the legislature and all that we do. One of the key areas that I've focused on, at least the last few years, which I think does not get near enough attention, is preschool education. Young children who do not have access to good quality preschool, they have a difficult time once they enter kindergarten. And many of those same students begin to fall behind academically as they begin to advance through school, to the point that we have to spend millions of dollars for remediation, trying to catch kids up with the SOLs and the standardized testing and etc. So I've really worked as a member of the Early Childhood Education Foundation and in the legislature to have additional funding for pre-K education. I think it's absolutely essential to ensuring we have a good quality pre-K program here in Virginia.
It starts them out well, and that's important, I know. What can we do together as Virginians to improve access to health care for all Virginians economically challenged at this time?
Well, it's a huge topic. Once again, I chair the Education and Health Committee in the State Senate. I'm also the chair of the Health and Human Resources Subcommittee of the Senate Finance Committee. And that subcommittee is responsible for funding all the state initiatives that have any type of health care area, one of which is Medicaid. Mm-hmm. And Medicaid is that safety net program for the frail elderly, for the disabled, and for the blind. And what we've been able to do the last few years is so important to individuals that have disabilities, whether it's intellectual or developmental disabilities or whatever the case, is to create more community-based waivers so that individuals do not have to be institutionalized. They can still live in communities. They can live in conjugate care or group homes and have a much more normal life, those who are capable of doing it. So we've made advances in that area, but that will continue to be a challenge to make sure we have community-based care for those disabled Virginians who can live in neighborhoods and enjoy a normal life.
Mm-hmm. Given the persistence of the weak economy nationwide, with weak consumer spending, the recent 15% drop in stock prices, we all know about the European debt crisis, which affects us strongly, the sustained high unemployment from 9% in 2011 to probably, they're thinking 8.5% in 2012 at flat housing market. What are some proactive and positive legislative steps and initiatives that might be undertaken, do you think, to carry us forward?
Well, it's difficult at the state level. Most of all the things you named have an impact in the nation and obviously the world. This is a worldwide recession that we're in. So how do you take policy decisions at the state level and have some counterbalance to all that adversity? It's very difficult indeed. I think the main thing we do in Virginia is to sort of stay the course that we have been, and that be a very well-managed fiscal state. We've been recognized as being the best managed state in the nation numerous times by independent sources. We've also been recognized as the best state to do business in, which I think is important. We were recognized as the state for a child to have the best opportunity to succeed. So with this recession being global and national in nature, it's very difficult for the state to come up with programs or initiatives to balance that. I think, my personal opinion is, we need to maintain our good fiscal integrity, keep Virginia on good, sound financial grounds, and let the worldwide and the national economy sort of shake itself out and not make any drastic steps right now in Virginia.
What new forms of energy development and energy conservation do you foresee for our state?
I think the field is wide open. You know, we're seeing much more interest now at the state level on green jobs, new energies from wind, solar. I represent Louisa County, the home of North Anna Nuclear Power Plant. I think there's still a need for expanded nuclear power. It's not that we don't have to have precautions and safety, we certainly do. But I think the whole area of energy development, I think it should be wide open. I think we should look anywhere and everywhere we can so that, and again, it's more of a national issue than it is a state issue. But nevertheless, I think there's things we've done here in Virginia to help promote and incentivize some of these new energy sources, in particular the jobs that come from them, at a time when we need more jobs and more energy.
You are well known for your efforts at nonpartisanship. Your voting record clearly reflects strong motivation to vote occasionally with the other side to achieve your goals. Do you envision your party being more willing to do the same going forward?
Well, at the state level, yes. I can't speak to what's happening on the national scene. There it seems to be so polarized that it's almost embarrassing. But at the state level, I think the best example is the last 18 months of Governor McDonnell's administration. I've mentioned a couple of times he's appointed me to some of his key initiatives in higher education and in health care. I've reciprocated and been a part of that. I supported the governor's transportation initiative. We have had many, many fights at the state capitol over transportation and transportation funding, and we end up at a stalemate with nothing happening. The governor asked me to fly with him to New York along with other legislators, where we met with the 3 bond rating agencies. And we floated this idea that came forth during the 2011 session about jump-starting our transportation initiatives with bond financing. All 3 of the agencies went back to our proud history and the well we manage, and they said, do it. So I was one of the early proponents of the governor's transportation program, and I think that's a good thing. It's transportation, or there's needs everywhere. Just then the other side, jobs and contractors having work and workers going back to work, that's good for Virginia's economy. So I don't get real hung up about, is it a Republican idea, a Democratic idea? If it's good for Virginia, then you're going to find me in there supporting it. If I don't think it is, then I won't support it. But I'm not real. I don't wear the brand so deep that I'm not willing to look at good things from Virginia, wherever it may come from.
It seems that people are hungry for results. So. In the Charlottesville area, we're all in the process of debating solutions for road congestion, speaking of transportation and transit improvements. Certain areas of Charlottesville, the precincts are new to you, but do you have some ideas that you think might work in terms of some solutions for the congestion that we're all experiencing?
Well, transportation is just like most of the other functions of government. It all gets down to money. You can't have bypasses, you can't have additional laneage, you can't have good airports or even our port system without spending money on it. We're the 12th largest state in the nation. And Virginia, once we get through this recession, will continue to grow. Virginia is in a critical geographic area on the East Coast. And so we need a good, sound, well thought out, well managed transportation program in Virginia. It's sort of a little bit disheartening, though, to, as I said, I supported the governor's transportation initiative and actually trying to get some projects going, and the 29 bypass becoming so controversial with the citizens here in this area. You would like to think that would not happen, but obviously in this case it has. So it seems to me Charlottesville and Albemarle is going to continue to grow and flourish, and if it does, it's going to have a well-planned, well-thought-out, and well-financed transportation program to go with it.
Tell us, if you would, Senator, about some legislation in the important area of mental health challenges.
I sponsored legislation some years ago that was tagged the Mental Health Parity Law. And basically and it was enacted by the General Assembly after a very contentious fight for over 2 years. But what mental health parity law said was that insurance companies could not treat behavioral health or mental health diagnosis any different than physical health. That a disease or a problem, a medical problem with the brain was no different than the stomach or the heart. And while that seems rather simple, it was not the case at all in Virginia, because mental illness had been stigmatized in many, many different ways in society. But fundamentally, the Mental Health Parity Law, which passed, basically says you treat diseases, problems with the brain the same as any other organ. It really helps a lot of mentally ill families and individuals because their insurance companies cannot deny them coverage for those type of diagnoses.
It's very encouraging to hear that. If reelected, what are some of your specific priorities for the Virginia budget?
Well, we're going to still continue to weather this storm. I mean, I have aspirations that we restore more money for education, both higher education and public education. It's needed. I mentioned early pre-K education. I think that's important. We've lost ground in our public safety areas. Our brave deputy sheriffs, police officers, and others who go out there, they've been hammered pretty hard during this recession. So on a short term, I'd say we're still going to weather this storm, and not only this recession, but this other dysfunction that's occurring in Washington, that will have a direct impact on Virginia. So in the near term, I think we're still going to be doing some damage control, hopefully being able to restore some modest levels of funding, particularly in education. But I think it's way too early to start having big dreams because the dollars simply will not be there, not yet.
In that connection, what have been some of the toughest budgetary decisions that you've had to make, Senator?
Well, it's almost across the board. The cutting of that public education funding was horrific. And it was bad for higher education, but at least in higher ed they could, raise tuition, which they have, which at least maintains the programming. Probably the most painful single cut was the closure of an adolescent psychiatric unit back in my hometown in Southwest Virginia. And not only the geographic part of it, but the fact when you think about a vulnerable population, adolescents with psychiatric diagnosis who have actually been institutionalized, and to have to close that unit, that was terribly painful to me. But I think it was a good example of how Virginia, we do different than they do in Washington. Again, all these cuts were definitely against my value system, but in reality, we have a balanced state budget in our Constitution, and if you're going to balance it, you have to make the tough choices, and we've done them. But that was probably the most single painful exercise. It was in my subcommittee, too, so to have to chair that and lead that was a very painful proposition.
What are some of the pieces of legislation of which you are most proud?
Well, the mental health parity bill, because it was so difficult to get passed, that one was helpful. The sex offender registry in Virginia, where now by law, if you commit a violent sexual crime, those perpetrators' names go on a registry. I sponsored that legislation. Children are victimized so much, so often, in so many ways that sex offender registry law really has helped protect a lot of children here in Virginia. There's been so many others over the years. Those are the two that really stand out paramount. I had a bill that requires criminal background checks for all daycare workers. And again, in order to protect children, those type steps are necessary. So I was very pleased to get that passed also.
What did these stimulus, in your view, achieve, and what did it fail to achieve?
Well, it really helped. It again was damage control. Here we are making massive cuts, and at least in the years that the stimulus money there, again, I'll go back to education, both higher education, public education, and even in Medicaid, for the frail elderly in our nursing homes. That stimulus money actually helped cushion the blow. We did not have to cut as drastic as would have been required without the stimulus. It saved a lot of jobs in that there were not more teachers laid off. There were not more healthcare and nursing assistants taken out of nursing homes. So it really helped protect jobs in Virginia and provide that needed service which the citizens deserve, want, and need, quite frankly.
How can Virginia increase care for citizens with disabilities?
Well, we don't have a great record in that regard when you compare us to other states. I keep going back to Medicaid, which is truly the safety net program, federal, state shared funding mechanism. We rank 47th out of the 50 states as to what we put in Medicaid. And again, frail elderly in nursing homes, the disabled, and the blind. These are very vulnerable populations. One of the things we need to do is to continue to have the state pay its portion and to actually elevate money for Medicaid. It's a matching dollar-for-dollar proposition. For each dollar we put in, we get a dollar from the federal government. So it really provides a lot of needed services. So one of the things we need to do is continue Medicaid funding. In terms of the institutionalization of folks, particularly with developmental disability, we need to get more of those individuals out into the community where they can live very productive lives and not be institutionalized for their entire life.
Finally, share with us, if you would, an issue that you feel strongly about that doesn't generally get much airtime and much attention.
Well, I will. The one that's become a real passion for me over the years is protection of the public's right to know, by way of having governmental meetings open to the public, having governmental records open to the public, and in a free society having citizens enjoy the right of really knowing what's going on in their government and being able to be informed about that. I chair the Freedom of Information Advisory Council, of which I was a part of the creation of that a number of years ago. And it's very rewarding, although it doesn't get a single bit of publicity at all, and most folks don't even know that there is a FOIA Act in the Virginia Code. But it really is a fundamental part of a free society that I've sort of discovered once I got in the legislature. But I've spent a lot of time and energy just working on the public's right to know.
Thank you very much, Senator Houck, for being our guest today on Politics Matters and taking time out of your very busy schedule.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Recent events in the Middle East, most recently in Syria and Libya, serve to remind us that freedom and free speech and expression is often hard-won. We have all seen the pictures of people coming forward to make their voices heard, often at tremendous personal cost of life and limb. Many have died for this precious gift of late. We here in the United States indeed did that once, at the dawn of our republic, in order to construct a fully functioning democracy. We have the freedom of opportunity to make our voices peaceably heard this November by going to the polls to vote for our state's representatives. Politics matters because we and our nation matter. Take a moment next month and participate. If you don't play, you cannot win. I want to thank Senator Houck again for joining in our discussion today. We thank you at home for listening and for your participation. We are always interested in hearing from you with any comments, concerns, topics for future programs. You can email us at info@politicsmatters.org. There's also a complete archive of all prior Politics Matters programs online, which you may watch in their entirety at any time. We air Tuesday and Saturday at 8 p.m. and weekly afternoons at 3 p.m. Thank you again, and until next time, I'm Jan Paynter, and this is Politics Matters.